Good morning. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm Ravi, Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me.
What up?
And we are
smiling.
We are leading the show with something I don't think I've ever led a show with before, and that is Nebraska basketball.
Oh, I thought we were talking Little League baseball.
Absolutely no.
What was I doing in notes last night?
They had, you could make the argument it's certainly the biggest win in modern Nebrasketball history.
Easily.
You'd have to go before my lifetime, I think, to get one bigger than that. I mean, you've got some where, you go back to 2013, 2014 when they made the NCAA tournament. There was a no-sit Sunday. It was kind of they have to win to feel good about getting in. They win. It was an amazing performance. But this is the number one team in the country. And this isn't a preseason like last year. If you had beaten North Carolina at the beginning of the year, they were technically the number one team in the country.
But they didn't act and play like the number one team
exactly.
in the country.
That wasn't a very good number one team in the country in North Carolina. We're halfway through the year. Purdue has been incredible. They lost one game in overtime to a conference opponent prior to last night.
And remember, Purdue was also in the Maui Invitational where they played like 2 top 10 teams.
The Maui Invitational was insane, and they swept through it. And then not just this year, but you go back to last year. This is not a flash in the pan Purdue team either. They were a number one seed. I know they got knocked off. They were a number one seed in the NCAA tournament last year. This has been a very good program for a while, and they were a legitimate number one in the country. And Nebraska not only won, but if you remove yourself from the moment for a second, they were in control for pretty much that entire game. They kept Purdue at arm's length for almost that entire game. There were a couple stretches in the second half. I think the closest it ended up getting was 51-50. Did Purdue take a lead in the second half?
Oh, man.
Briefly.
You're testing me now.
I think they briefly did in that after it went 51-50.
Maybe?
I think it went back and forth a couple times. But the way Nebraska – I think so. I think there were a few minutes where it went back and forth.
You know what's great about
I'll say let's
having like guys like Seamus and Rob send us stats after games. We can find out how many lead changes there were. And by just pulling up the stat sheet, the PDF, it is 2. There were 2 lead changes. It does not tell me when they happened.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the play-by-play, which I'm not going to try and do while we're talking on the air.
But yes, I mean, 2 lead changes is incredibly low for a matchup that Purdue is in.
Absolutely, especially, but the point is Nebraska essentially had total control of the game the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
I know it felt nerve-wracking because as somebody who's followed not just Nebraska basketball, but Nebraska sports, you expect a shoe to drop at some point. You're kind of just waiting, especially in the last decade, right? You're waiting for the bad thing to happen. And I got to tell you, Nebraska's on a pretty good run here of the good things happening, both in basketball and in football. This was, we saw it, Matt on the Twitter stream says this is by far the best win in their history. They essentially dominated that game. And that's kind of my point here. This didn't feel like a fluky win by any means.
Didn't feel like a fluke, didn't feel like a sweat. And look, I'll tell you this too. You mentioned like you were kind of waiting for that moment where Nebraska was just going to crumble. And I think that moment came early in the second half when Purdue started making threes again.
They went on their run.
But the difference here is, and the reason why all of last night I wasn't ever feeling a panicky state is because Nebraska found ways to still get their points while Purdue was getting more points, if that makes sense. Because they had that 11-point buffer at half, they were able to allow a 13-5 run, whatever it was, for Purdue to open the half and still feel comfortable that they weren't out of the game yet.
Yeah, they still have the
Purdue
lead.
wasn't taking over. And because that feeling was there, that's why I never felt at any point that lead, even if it got relinquished for a point or two, wasn't going to get relinquished by game's end. And you mentioned, too, that you don't think this win was a fluke.
So real quick, Purdue didn't take a lead in the second half. 51-50 was the closest that it got.
Okay, so only first half. And think about it, too. Those lead changes probably happened when it was like 12-10 and like 16-14.
Yeah, I think both teams were pre-30 points when it happened, but just scrolling through here.
So you mentioned that it wasn't a fluke, and I'm totally with you. Nebraska is built to be an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I mean, we heard Fanta say it when he came on with us before the season.
But I'm more looking at it because I needed to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Fanta, I mean, he's a genius. He's a basketball genius.
That was one of his better calls I've heard him make,
and a very bold one.
Yeah,
at that.
I thought this was an NIT team.
Well, yeah, to claim that Nebraska's officially back, that's pretty bold to say after, you kind of saw what they did in the offseason and flipped over a ton of things. It's not Derek Walker, Sam Griesel anymore. It's like 4 new players in Keisei Tominaga.
Yeah, I was really concerned about Walker and Griesel. I really was.
But you look at how they carry themselves, their demeanor, their body language, their confidence. They stand on business. And you can see that they're an NCAA tournament team, not only based on how they talk after a win like that, but how they experience the court rushing as well. Like, they didn't get wrapped up in that moment. They enjoyed that moment, but it wasn't like they're a 16 seed taking down a 1 in the NCAA tournament where they're like, we're this Cinderella team. This Nebraska team doesn't believe they're a Cinderella. They believe they're the real deal, and they're showing that they're the real deal too. They kind of just shook it off and said, nope, we know what we are. We know what we can do. And other teams, whether it's in the Big Ten, non-con or tournament teams that happen to see Nebraska at some point, this is a scary team to play against. You don't want to play against this team because even when it's not going incredibly right for Nebraska, like let's say Wisconsin was making everything. And Nebraska didn't play bad.
No,
they shot the ball very well.
Defensively, they weren't good enough.
Yeah, they weren't physical enough.
Overall, they weren't bad.
But they will out-physical you 95% of games. 95% of games this season, Nebraska will out-physical their opponent. I don't even know if that's like a word, out-physical. But you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
They will bully you. They will completely tear you down. Why did Edey have 2 points in the first half? Not just because he started to get in a little bit of foul trouble, but because Rink Mast was and look, he needs more credit. Like, I don't think nationally Rink Mast is getting enough credit. We give him a ton. But Rink is disruptive. He has great footwork. His form as he defends is just beautiful. Like, he's kind of like a little Ryan Kalkbrenner-esque. He may not be the shot blocker, but in terms of form, straight up form, good defense, like that's kind of what you get out of Rink. He's a little more mobile, I think. He can get out to the perimeter faster than Kalk could, but that's just because Kalk is so much taller and his length is what saves him a lot of times in shot blocking opportunities. But Rink taking down Zach Edey in that game, completely taking him out of the game, and then also the double team that you saw down low to force Edey to move out instead of in. I mean, the game plan was incredible.
So that's the part that I want to talk about was the game plan. Like, obviously, Mast did a great job on him, but the game plan to kind of swarm Edey was it was executed at an incredibly high level. It was not just the fact that they were able to bother Edey, but the fact that they were able to bother Edey and then recover out to everyone else. Like, yes, there were some open shots for Purdue that they didn't knock down, but they shot the ball 40% from three. It's not like 39.4% for three. That's a good number. It's not like they went ice cold on wide open threes and just couldn't throw it in the ocean. You'll take 39.4% on 33 three attempts pretty much every night. Now, Nebraska shot 60% from three. They shot out of their mind.
Is that good?
Which is the only real outlier here, I feel like.
Keisei couldn't miss. This was one of those Keisei games that he showed up.
Keisei and Wilcher had huge shot. And I will say the one we're going to forget about, Josiah Alec in the corner hit an enormous three.
Well, when he made it, I go, this guy can shoot the long ball.
And so did Juwan Gary. They were kind of in the similar stretch.
Yes.
And I think Gary's
bucket
came first. I thought it was a 2 because I didn't think he was in the corner of the far corner. I couldn't see it very well, but they gave him the 3 on it. That one and the Alec one were enormous, but
we call those put away points.
The game that the game plan for Edey was first of all was the right game plan, and then it was executed in a way that allowed them to, I mean, listen, he had 15 points and 7 rebounds. You look at that and you go, oh, that's a pretty good game. He averages like 22 and 10. So if you can hold Zach Edey to 15 and 7, you did an incredible job. And they really did. Mass played incredibly well. He ends up with 18 points. He didn't lead scores. Tominaga had 19. But the way that he was able to both defend Edey, but what I think is a real problem for Purdue is a guy like Mast who is a little too quick for Edey. Mast is not even the quickest big he's probably going to face this year, but obviously you can't match up Edey size for size, right? Like that person just doesn't exist in college basketball and barely exists in the NBA. But you can make it really uncomfortable for him in terms of his athleticism and quickness, because that's a place where he can be beat. And I thought Mast did a really good job of that. You saw a baseline spin early that got
his baby hook is, I mean, just it's a touch of grace.
It really is. But he had a baseline spin early that Edey couldn't keep up with, and you got to the point where they were Purdue was having to send help on Mast because Edey was having a hard time staying in front of him or behind him on a post-up, however you want to put it, but staying between Mast and the basket. So being able to expend that much energy on both ends of the floor against what most people are going to vote likely as the National Player of the Year in Zach Edey was an incredible performance from Rink Mast. And I will say one of the other things that that I really enjoyed about this game was and he's been playing like this for a little bit now, but I've been waiting for this version of CJ Wilcher for a while. He came out of high school with this reputation of being an incredible shooter. He didn't play much at Xavier, which is where I kind of got familiar with him in the Big East. And you're kind of waiting on this guy. I think he was a 4-star coming out of high school.
Didn't really have a lot of time last year, though, because I think his role kind of like if say he got 10 minutes, it like by season's end, he was getting like 7-8 minutes.
Yeah, his role has not been consistent at Nebraska. He hasn't consistently been able to knock down shots, and his numbers have been like the percentages have been okay, but it didn't feel like that was a guy you could rely on when you needed him to make shots. Man, when Purdue really locked in on Tominaga for most of that second half, Wilcher came through huge. He was 4 for 5 from the field, 16 points, 3 of 4 from 3-point range, and did not record a single other stat except for a single personal foul. But that's exactly what they needed out of CJ Wilcher as a floor spacer, as a guy that could make shots. That he was one of the reasons, you mentioned that run Purdue had early in the second half. He was one of the big reasons why Nebraska was able to punch back and get that lead back out to 6-7 points after it got down to 1. And really, that's kind of where it's at. Purdue didn't get much closer than 6 points for the last 10 or so minutes of the game. Nebraska did a really good job of keeping them at arm's length. And then by the time you got to the finishing time, Purdue looked out of gas. Like they looked like they had run out of steam trying to overcome multiple double-digit leads, and they didn't have anything left, and Nebraska did. And it ended up being one of the cooler moments. I mean, there's been a handful of cool moments over the last sports calendar year for the University of Nebraska. Unfortunately, not very many of them came on the football field, but you got Volleyball Day in Nebraska, which is untouchable in terms of its magnitude. But this might be the biggest win in Nebraska program history. It's certainly in the top handful. And the way that you saw PBA last night react to what happened, you see Matt Rule rushing the court with fans, which Like,
Which is anybody shocked by that?
no, but the more this guy exists, the more just like, I love this dude.
Mhm.
Like, I said this before the season, every time I heard a presser, and now every time he talks,
Well, because his values don't just, they're not just with the football team.
he
This
genuinely,
is value in life.
this is who he is.
That's how he carries himself.
Yeah.
He doesn't say OOU and say, this is only a football thing.
No,
this is a Nebraska
he's
thing.
going to wrestling matches before Nash Hutmacher was on the team. He's going to volleyball when he's not exhausted from the game that he just coached. He's going to men's basketball. He's about, and it's not just the university, he's about Nebraska. That's why I love Matt Rule, because I'm about where I'm from, right?
Where I come from, there's cornbread and chicken.
No, I'm good.
Where I come from.
I'm
Not an Alan Jackson fan?
No, I don't listen.
Whoa.
I don't listen to a lot of country.
That was a quick no there, Shane. Did you hear that?
I could go for
That was a little disgusting.
I could go for some
I
cornbread
just don't
and
listen to
chicken.
country. It's not
That was disgusting, Mike.
I-
You disgust me, Ravi.
Yeah.
You disgust me.
yeah, country.
Blasphemy.
Country disgusts me a little bit.
Well, I think that's the first time I've ever used the word blasphemy on
Probably.
in
It
media.
doesn't come up a lot.
Well, it does when you're Stephen A. Smith.
Well, that's true. But that's one of the things that I love the most about about Matt Rule is, and I talked about this in the difference between him and Scott Frost, is even though Scott Frost was from here, Matt Rule is more of one of us than Scott Frost ever felt. And I don't want to make this about Matt Rule, but it was really cool to see him charging the court like the rest of the fans here.
How about Sam Hoiberg's? Just
Yes.
not just his dominance, because like I want to call it dominance because the way he plays is so scrappy. I feel like he's such a dominant player.
Dominance
for his role.
Yeah.
For his role, I think he's a dominant, scrappy player. So
I would
let me put an adjective in front of scrappy player and let that be dominant. Let it be that, Ravi, because the way that he's playing and the way that he's embraced his role at Nebraska is also a little CJ Wilcher-esque. Because Sam, it's tough. It's tough to play for your parent.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
In all cases, I never played for my parent, but I know people that have, and they always say it. I mean, not just to make this a Creighton example, but it's pretty timely. When Doug McDermott came back and spoke, he's like, yeah, it wasn't easy playing for my dad.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have changed it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how Sam would say it too. And just how he's developed and grown into the player that he is, because he wasn't a high recruit.
No.
Like, and and look, we can just call it how it is. Like, he got his spot on the team because his dad's the coach.
Yeah.
So like he's there, but sometimes you have to make the most of your moment, and that's what Sam Hoiberg does. The way he gets to the rack, the way he sees the floor. He may not take the best shots all the time, but defensively, he is absolutely incredible because he moves. He's never tired, and if there's an open guy on the floor, he will run across the court to go guard that man. Like, that's just the type of guy, the type of player, the type of teammate he is, and you can't teach scrappy. Sometimes you just have to be scrappy, and that's Sam Hoiberg.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the term dominant. I would use the term impactful. He's incredibly impactful.
No, he's dominant. He's a dominant, scrappy player.
Yeah, hard pass there. Sam Hoiberg is incredibly impactful in what he's asked to do, and he's I think he's a real embodiment of what this team has turned out to be, in the sense of, we've talked a lot about before how this team fits and makes sense together in a way that a lot of Fred Hoiberg's earlier teams at Nebraska didn't really. You didn't really have guys that wanted to be role players before. You didn't really have guys that would accept their role on the team before. It was a lot of transfers.
That's why this team is built to be
it's
a
why
deep
they're
tournament run team.
So much better than his previous teams have been, is because you have a team that actually makes sense in a basketball sense, and not just on paper. And Sam Hoiberg's a great example of that. And I do think he's more talented than people give him credit for, because he's a walk-on. He's the coach's kid, and he looks like a walk-on, like with the headband
he 100% looks like he does not belong.
Yeah, he looks like a team manager, like he does. Like, that's the look. But he's a good basketball player. You don't play 24 minutes against the number one team in the country and score 9 points. I mean, he's got like the perfect glue guy line, right? 9 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, no turnovers. And the two that stick out the most to you are those steals and breakaway fast breaks where he's all alone and finishes by himself in front of the Purdue defense. He is incredibly impactful in what they ask him to do. And honestly, they probably don't win last night without his contributions. That was how impactful he was. Now, we've kind of buried the lead a little bit here because we haven't talked that much about Tominaga. And he deserves to be talked about. He deserves more time than we have left in this segment. So I'm going to have you hold that thought right there. There's something I said on Twitter that last night that people freaked out a little bit about, but I want to explain what I meant. We'll get to that and more. We'll also set up the show at some point, probably here. It's a Wednesday. I'm Ravi, Lulla. It's Andrew Rogers. We are live from Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. You can also join us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And don't forget, you can always be a part of the show. You can give us a call at 888-638-4876. That's the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Coming up next, we will set up the show, and we'll get into Keisei Tominaga's impact here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back here to Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. You can also catch us on the Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube streams where Jordan W. says, Ravi Lulla, a man of great taste with the White Monster. I mean, no free promos, but got to stay awake. You know, it's an early morning here.
Not a fan of the white.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of Monster, though. So I guess that I shouldn't tear down your choice.
The specific flavor.
Because I don't like the energy drink.
Yeah, there's certain energy drinks that have like a little bit of an aftertaste that I don't love, and this one doesn't have an aftertaste, to me at least.
Yeah, I don't like Red Bull.
I don't love Red Bull. No.
I don't like Monster. Maybe I just don't like energy.
I like C4.
That's okay to me. Bang used to be my thing, and now it's not anymore because I drank it too much.
Yeah, you kind of got oversaturated with it.
Yeah, so Bang's kind of overrated to me. I'm on the Celsius kick now.
Yeah, my wife.
Why am I talking about all these brands? Like, screw that.
I don't know. Yeah.
If you want to be talked about on the show, you can give us a call.
You can sponsor
888-638-4876. We have plenty of things
and
that you can sponsor.
I will like whatever energy drink you have to offer. What the energy drink for Nebraska early in the game, at least, was
what gave them wings?
Was Keisei Tominaga. I think early on his performance, because they did a better job on him. They were blanketing him. They were basically face guarding him in the second half for much of that second half. But in the first half, I think he helped get Nebraska to the point where they not only believed they could win, but they could see a path to victory. And he went through some stretches there in the first half. It was kind of, if I remember right, it was him and Sam Hoiberg that went through a stretch that stretched that lead out to double digits late in the first half there. And
the 13-0 run.
Yeah, and I think that's where Nebraska really started to be like, oh, not just we can hang with this team, but we can beat this team. Like, we can go out and beat this team.
What's funny is they knew that, though, before the game even started.
I know, but once it starts, because here's the difference between this game and like Wisconsin, for example. They went up to Wisconsin believing they could win that game and knowing they could win that game and knowing they could hang with them. And then they got kind of punched in the mouth early, and it felt like they never totally recovered from that. They started off 8-2 in this one.
Right.
They punched Purdue in the mouth.
But I don't think it's a Nebraska thing. I think it's more of a Purdue thing, and coming in knowing the history of this matchup at the vault of guys, this game's always close. Like last year, we were the 3. I think they were the 3, and this game went to overtime. And this Nebraska team, we scouted them. We know what they are. They're better than they were last year. Like, that's what Purdue was thinking coming in. So they're kind of coming maybe more tense than Nebraska. So I think it's actually more of a Purdue thing entering Pinnacle Bank Arena than it is Nebraska knowing that they were going to win, because you go into every game knowing that you're going to win. And I know what you're saying there with like the Wisconsin thing. You have a lot of momentum. You're kind of feeling a little high, and you're like, okay, this is our thing. But then when you get beat like you did.
Yeah, they kind of fell flat against Wisconsin.
It's kind of like a punch in the gut. Like, we played well and we still got, tatered.
Beat up pretty good.
Yeah, we still got tatered. you come back here and you're facing the 1 seed, but knowing the history of this matchup, knowing how last year felt when you were so close, Nebraska had so much motivation, and they knew the fan support was going to be there, whether the weather was as bad as it was last night or not. It just seemed like at no point did they think they were going to lose. But Purdue coming in, if they come in tense and they don't start off as strong as they have this season, when they beat Tennessee, when they beat Arizona, Gonzaga, they beat Marquette, and all of those games where they start out strong, Nebraska will get you. They'll get to you. They'll get under your skin.
I think
Nebraska, you won't be able to recover.
I think Nebraska needed a strong first half to go from
the belief factor in the second half was different than the first.
To conviction, right? Like there's a difference there, right? Like you can believe, and then when you actually see it happening,
believe and then know.
They knew at that point, especially at that stretch where they stretched it out to double digits at the end of the first half, and that was largely Tominaga. And then you had the shot. I believe it was just before or just after the under 4 timeout in the second half. The shot, I don't even know how Tominaga got it off. Like I don't know how
he gets off half the shots he takes.
Fair.
I mean, he's like, if my hand is here, that's where the defender's body is on Keisei Tominaga. And he somehow gets the ball between the hand or body of that defender up an arc and splash. Like it's just wash, rinse, repeat with that guy.
It was one of the, and I tweeted about it as it happened. I said, if Nebraska holds on to this game, that's a shot that we're going to look at, because there were a couple stretches where Purdue's defense started ratcheting up a little bit, and you're like, okay, Nebraska's not getting quite the looks that they want to. They're not getting, they're kind of seemingly a little bit more disjointed on offense than they had been at other stretches. But that's every time that happened, somebody hit a big shot. We mentioned the Juwan Gary huge shot. We mentioned the Josiah Alec. We mentioned CJ Wilcher did it multiple times. And then that one by Keisei Tominaga toward the end there was kind of the one where you're like, oh yeah, they're going to do this. And that to me is what Tominaga, like that's the value of a Keisei Tominaga, right? He's got his flaws. He is limited in certain things on a basketball court. For his size and not really being a point guard, like it can be tough certain situations. It can be tough to get him the shots he needs because he doesn't really necessarily create for himself the way a player of his size typically does. But that right there you saw is the value of a guy like Tominaga, is he can hit those shots and get you out of trouble when nothing else is going right. And that's what Nebraska has this year that they haven't had in years past. They've got a couple get you out of trouble guys. And I don't think they have one guy that you feel super confident that you're like, oh, he's always going to be able to do that.
Yeah, he's getting the ball when we need him to get the ball in this moment.
Like if Creighton has a problem, they're probably going to Trey Alexander. You feel pretty good about that. And they're going to
back up a Shireman.
Yeah, and they're going to live with the results there. Nebraska has a few different options. And at some point that may come to bite them because they don't necessarily have like that one guy. But for right now and for last night especially, it was a huge help because Purdue couldn't key on one guy. Before we get to, we'll talk about other things at some point today. But this is,
but it's an exciting day.
It's a huge day for Nebraska basketball, and it is again, it might be the biggest win in program history. It's certainly, they hadn't beat a number one team in 41 years. But I tweeted something out last night that I said, at least for one night, Nebraska basketball is the best team in the country, and I believe that to be true. And that doesn't mean that listen, this is very likely a tournament team. Things would have to go very poorly from here on out, and we haven't seen an indication of that. Like there's a very good chance they'll be ranked next week. That doesn't mean I think they're going to a Final Four. It doesn't mean anything. But for one night, nobody has played Purdue like this. No one. The one loss was Northwestern in overtime.
But that was close all game.
They swept through a ridiculous Maui field. No one has played Purdue like this. Purdue has been pretty much the best team, regular season team in the country for 2 years almost. Nebraska did something to them that I haven't seen done to them, I don't think, in the last 2 years.
It's because they take away the big man, and that's what Nebraska does so well. And think about their losses this season. Okay.
Mhm.
They lost to Creighton.
Mhm.
They lost to Minnesota.
Yep.
And they lost to Wisconsin.
Yep.
Okay. The reason I say they take away the big man, in 2 of those 3 losses, that's exactly what they did. The Minnesota loss is kind of like
that's the outlier.
Yeah, and I kind of kick it to the curb right now because Minnesota's actually playing decent basketball.
A lot better, yeah.
So maybe it will age well. I'm not going to like jump on that train just yet, but Nebraska, that was so early in the season. Forget about it, move forward. But the other 2 losses to Creighton and Wisconsin, in those games, those teams won via the 3.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-point shooting, if that's what beats Nebraska. But when Nebraska beats you, they take away your big man. Kalk only had 13 points in that game. He should have had more, but he only had 13. Edey in this game only, I think, had 15.
15 points.
And the reason he had 15 was because he was getting some bunnies late that Nebraska didn't have to guard anymore because they were up by so much. By taking away the big man, by winning the physical battle, by double teaming your guy down low, your best player down low, Nebraska will eat you alive inside the perimeter. They will win more games because of that than they'll lose.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's what we've seen so far this year. Coming up next, we'll kind of wrap up our Nebraska basketball discussion. We'll let you know what else is coming up here on the show. And we will wrap up hour number 1 on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here. We're live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as well as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Coming up on the show today, I'm going to set up the show. We're only 45 minutes in. Brian Christopherson in our next segment, kicking off the 8 o'clock hour.
As he does
join
every
us
Wednesday.
From Husker 24/7, Kevin Sjuts from 1011 News in Lincoln.
As he does every other Wednesday.
At the game last night. So we will get some thoughts from him. And then at 9 o'clock, we'll be joined by our very own Anna Bellinghausen from Hurrdat Sports.
As she does every Wednesday.
She does as well. And then we're going to play a little trivia with Anna as well. We're going to talk a little Creighton with Anna. We're not going to forget, the Jays beat DePaul last night. Not nearly as impressive as Nebraska knocking off the number 1 team in the country, which is why we're not getting to them off the top here. But I had one final thought on Nebraska basketball before we kind of start to move on to some other things. And obviously with our guests, we'll return to Nebraska's big win last night. But
I think you could go 3 hours on it.
I mean, 3 hours on any one topic's a lot.
Yeah, it's a long time because we would just be recycling what we've said at the beginning.
I'd be happy with that.
Well, Shane, it's because you don't really listen to the show over there.
Okay, all right.
Oh, Shane's just like, all right, I'll take note of that.
He just tunes in and out.
Hey, you're on his list now, not the nice list.
No, so there's a movie that we both really, really like, maybe even love.
Pearl Harbor.
No, For Love of the
Game.
Game.
A good movie.
Pearl Harbor's better than I remember it. Like I went and saw it in theaters when I was younger, and I was expecting Saving Private Ryan, and it wasn't that. And so I didn't like it at the time, but upon rewatch, it's better than I remember.
But I do love For the Love of the Game. I only said Pearl Harbor because it's the fiance's favorite movie.
Listen, it's not bad. It's not terrible. So we both really like the movie For Love of the Game. There's a moment in that movie, and this is what I wanted to reference in the last segment about when I said Nebraska for at least one night was the best team in the country. There's a moment in that movie where Kevin Costner's character is pitching a perfect game, right? Spoilers. And it's like a 30
Way to go. Way to go. That movie just came out, Ravi. Now anybody that wants to see it can.
A light 26 years ago. And he's throwing a perfect game, and his arm's starting to get tired, and he's struggling, and his catcher, John C. Reilly. John C. Reilly plays his catcher.
Dale from Step Brothers, right?
Yes, Dale. It's John C. Reilly. He's been in a ton of stuff.
See, I don't know actual actors' names. I only know them based on
like
previous roles.
Yeah, it's Dale from Step Brothers. But he used to do a lot more serious stuff before he kind of got in with Will Ferrell and started doing a lot of comedies. But John C. Reilly's character goes out to the mound to talk to Kevin Costner, and Kevin Costner's like, "Hey, I don't know if I've got anything left." And he's like, "Hey, man, just throw it." And this is a bad team that they're playing on, so it's kind of like the highlight of their season. And he says, "Hey, we're the best team in baseball right now. We don't stink today." And I don't think Nebraska stinks. I think they're a tournament team. I think they're very, very good. But when I say they were the best team in basketball last night, that's kind of the context in which I mean it, right? Like, in that moment, nobody was playing better basketball than Nebraska because we haven't seen anybody play that well against Purdue this year. And maybe outside of Farley Dickinson, we haven't seen anybody play that well against Purdue for a couple years. This team in that moment was the best team in college basketball. They weren't just a tournament team. They weren't just, a maybe top third of the Big Ten team. They were the best team in basketball in that moment. And it's okay to just compartmentalize something that much just to say, hey, this isn't this, I don't know what tomorrow is. I don't know what it's going to look like a week from now. I certainly don't know what it's going to look like in March. But for one moment, Nebraska was the best team in college basketball. And that is, we hear Coach Rule talk about it a lot, a part of kind of the process and not looking past like the day you're on and looking even to the game that's next. That's kind of what he's talking about, is trying to be the best team you can possibly be in the moment you're in. Michael Jordan used to talk about this all the time. Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson would talk about staying in that moment. And Nebraska captured that perfectly last night. And to me, that's something, as much as the win, that's something to be celebrated, is to achieve your ultimate goal in the moment that you're in is such a huge thing that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate outside of like, oh yeah, they beat the number one team in the country. It's like, yes, but in that moment, they were damn near perfect. And that's awesome too.
And across the country, nobody's thinking, oh wow, that's a huge upset. It's kind of like when Iowa State beat Houston last night.
Like, oh, it's a really good win.
It's a really good win. It's not a huge upset. And that's how people will address this Nebraska win too.
And that's a credit to where Hoiberg has brought this team. Because even 2 years ago, this would have been like a basketball shattering upset. As it is now, it was, hey, Nebraska's a pretty good basketball team. They've been playing pretty good. And look what they can do on the right night.
They're turning heads. And you not only saw it at the beginning of the year with John Fanta, but you're starting to see it with a ton of other college basketball writers and analysts and just big TV and like podcast personalities, because I'm just seeing it. And I know I only follow a few of them, but Gary Parrish said something about him. John Rothstein last night said something about him. Like, these are some of the bigger names in college basketball. Nebraska's getting noticed.
It was a national story.
Nebraska is back on the basketball map, and it's not because they just beat the number one seed. It's because they're a really good basketball team.
Yeah,
and people know that.
They're 13-3 now. They're on their way to, again, they don't have a ton of work left to do to make themselves an NCAA tournament team. Like, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I think it's 16 or 17.
What are they, 11-3 now?
13-3, I think.
Okay.
I think last time it was 13. So 13-3, 3-2 in conference. I think they've got.
Oh, I'm thinking of what Creighton was yesterday, 11-3.
Yeah, and so the Creighton got their 12th win yesterday. 4, I think. Yeah, 4. 12-4. Creighton is.
Was DePaul 3-11? Yes. I know I saw 3 and an 11 in some.
DePaul was
3-11. Okay,
but I mean, you look. I think they've got 16 games left in the regular season. Realistically, you get 7 wins there, you're in. Like, you would feel really good about being in at that point.
If they get to 19, which is only 6 wins away at this point, which they'll get it. They'll get 6 wins.
Yeah.
There's not a doubt in my mind that this team's going to get 6 more wins. If they get to 19 and still get bounced in the first round of the Big Ten tournament, I still think they get into a play-in game.
I think
because of the wins that they have this win right here.
Was it a 7-10 play-in game they do? Because they do the 16s and then they do, maybe it's the 12s.
The 12s. The 12s do it.
So if they get to 19, they're probably in a 12 play-in game.
Maybe an 11. I think it varies. I really do think it varies.
I can't remember. But if they get to 20 wins, I think they're pretty solidly in because they've got a really good strength of schedule. They've got some good wins. I think they've got, currently as it stands, and this changes, they've got 3 Q1 wins. But I mean, you look at it, there's 100% 6 or 7 more wins on this schedule.
Easily.
I mean,
easily.
You've got Michigan at home. Michigan's not playing very good basketball. Nope. You got Penn State at home. You got Minnesota at home. You got Rutgers at home.
They'll get Minnesota the second time around.
That's 4 right there. That's 4 without, and they've got Northwestern at home. That's 5. And Northwestern's a good team, but that's a team they need to beat at home.
Yeah, they have to beat them at home, but Boo Buie is a beast.
He is. So we'll call it, you got 4 wins at home. We won't even count Northwestern. Then you've got very winnable games at Iowa, at Rutgers. You've got Ohio State at home, who's not a world beater. That's super winnable. You've got Wisconsin at home on the return trip. That'll be a good win if they can get it, but I'm not even going to count that one. But you've got you go at Ohio State again. You've got at Michigan. Like there's 10 or 12 you wouldn't even have to stretch to really think about getting wins in those 10 or 12 games. And all of a sudden you're getting into the low 20s is not out of the question here for this team.
Just you reading that kind of has me feeling a bit uneasy because of how strong that schedule is, but that also reassures me to why I believe 6 more wins gets this team into the NCAA tournament, because their strength of schedule is
their strength of schedule
great.
Will be absurd. You get to 19 or 20 wins for sure. This team is in, and I think they've got every opportunity to get to those wins. So incredible night for Nebraska basketball. I'm sure we'll talk to Kevin Sjuts about it at 8:30. He was there last night. Probably talk to BC a little bit about it as well. I do want to get some updates from him on what he knows with the transfer situation.
And Jamal Banks what was that when Shafe said today was the day that was that Sam on Monday that said a decision should probably come Wednesday?
What I heard was between midweek, which is today, and end of week, which is Friday. So sometime in this next few days.
So we're in the window.
We're in the window for Jamal Banks to make his decision. Everything I've been told is they still feel pretty good about it.
And what about Thompson?
Haven't heard as much about Thompson yet, the linebacker out of Syracuse. I know a lot of people are interested.
Was his window, though, the Wednesday to Friday?
I don't know about his decision window.
I want to say that Shafe said, hey, was it Shafe that said it would have been Wednesday or later? I don't remember. Wednesday or later is any time.
I was like, Wednesday or later is any from now till eternity. No, I don't remember if he gave a window for Thompson or not. But got some. We'll see if we can get an update from our guy Brian Munson on where that stands. Want to
Christopherson.
I was thinking Brian Munson because he put in a crystal ball for Jamal Banks on 3. Brian Christopherson. God, we've never talked to Brian Munson. I don't know where that came from. We'll talk to Brian Christopherson coming up next. Maybe get some updates on this whole Dana Holgorsen situation.
Yeah, that is one that's still brewing,
still floating out there. That's
it may be leaning the right direction more than it is the wrong direction.
I'm curious what you think the right and wrong direction is there. We will get to all of that and more coming up here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as Brian Christopherson is about to join us on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. I want to tell you about our Warhorse Festival of Games coming up here for the big game, the Professional Football Championship on February 11th. You have a chance to win up to $100,000 with their prop card challenge. Every time you go to the casino in Lincoln and place at least a $50 sports bet, you will get an entry into this challenge. If you're a rewards member, very important to become a Warhorse rewards member here. And if you go 25 for 25 on your prop card challenge, you will win $100,000. If you don't win even if you don't get any of them right, you're still going to be entered into a $20,000 cash or free slot play drawing. There's nothing to lose here except for, you might not win your bets, but that's okay. That happens. I know Andrew's been on a little bit of a roll here lately, but
kind of.
Make sure I said a little bit of a little mini roll.
Yeah, that's true.
Make sure you go to warhorsecasino.com for more information. And don't forget, we're not too far around the corner. There's going to be $1 million March Madness challenge coming up as well. As we get further into college basketball season, we'll tell you more about that. But for now, it's all about the big game on February 11th. Make sure you go to warhorsecasino.com for more details.
And the last thing I'll add there before we get to BC, those props will likely become available right after the AFC and NFC championship games.
I believe
expect the week after for
Monday
those to come out, and then they have to be submitted the day before, or validated. I'm sorry. They have to be validated the day before the big game.
And we will continue to tell you how to do that as we get closer. But you can also go to warhorsecasino.com for that information as well. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, how are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty good. Not a lot of sleep, but that's okay. It was a fun night.
When'd you get to bed?
Oh, I got to bed about 2:00. I'm not always about doing free advertising, but I appreciate that De Leon's is open until 2:00. Ripped through the drive-thru at about 1:20. Had it all to myself, which was nice. So knocked down 4 tacos with a Mountain Dew like I was 19 years old again, and it was pretty good. And the dogs enjoyed a couple bites with me, so it was a nice finish to the evening.
Just reliving those college days.
Yeah, did you rush for the court then too, since you're reliving those days?
I would get hurt doing that and Matt Painter kind of gave us a lecture about that at the very end of his talk. I don't know if some people heard that. I get it. He's worried about the safety and stuff going forward. He said we need to take some measures with the court stormings. He wasn't trying to be a real party pooper, but he had some words about it. But I enjoyed watching it. I'll say that.
BC, as you're kind of processing what you saw last night, what was your biggest takeaway the more you think about what took place at PBA last night, as far as, what does this mean for Nebraska basketball? Is it just a really nice night? Is it sort of validation of the season we thought they were having? Like, how do you process what you saw?
Well, in the big picture, it's the kind of win that if this team is what they think they are, it helps push them over the hump when it's decision time. Now they have to, over the next 2 months, continue to be steady enough to make this count for what it's supposed to, right? Like you can't just fall off the cliff now and not win some more games. But I think this team last night showed when they play their best ball, they can be a tourney team, and they can compete with anybody in the league. And the beauty about last night, Hoiberg said in his post game, but it was completely true. Every guy that touched the floor for Nebraska sort of maximized what he can do well. Like Bryce Williams woke up yesterday and didn't think he was going to play. When he did the morning walk to the bathroom, he said it wasn't feeling too hot, and he wasn't thinking it was going to happen. And he ends up with an incredible stat line considering 9 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, 2 block shots. He had sort of the grown man play that I thought like sealed it at the end, where Edey's going in for a typical like Zach Edey layup or dunk or whatever to cut into the lead. And Bryce Williams comes and swats it from behind. But then you have CJ Wilcher, like accepting his role all season and coming off in the second half and just catching fire for 16. Casey was there in these stretches where he would just be on. And then, Sammy Hoiberg had a great game defensively. You just go down the line. Everybody did their job really well. You get a night like that. I could tell 2 minutes in, I didn't know that Nebraska was going to win, but you could see that it was a different team than Saturday in Wisconsin. There was just like an energy and intensity to the defense and the way they crashed on their doubles on Zach Edey and the plan they had on that side of the floor that you thought they're gonna make Purdue have to earn this one at least. And sure enough, they did that and more.
BC, we heard a lot about 1982 last night, the last time Nebraska took down a number 1 seed. But I want you to stick with recent Nebraska history for this question. Fill in the blank. This was the biggest win in recent Nebraska history since when?
Oh, man. I'm going to skip something in between. It wasn't like No Sit Sunday. We have a way of like making what just happened above other things. Like it wasn't that same intensity throughout the whole day. And like the third deck wasn't even full last night. And there's reason. It was cold, it was snowy, all that stuff. I'm sure there's some people that didn't expect it was going to go the way it did. But as far as you think of Nebraska's track record, they had a good team under Tim Miles that won a lot of games. at near the end of his tenure that didn't make it. And there's probably a win or two in there that those guys would say at the moment felt pretty special. But for a team that actually right now, I think people now say this could really happen. I could see this team's name on the bracket. I think it's the biggest win since that game against Wisconsin that everybody remembers. Just because if you look at the track record of Husker basketball, there hasn't been a tourney team since then. So and this team's got a shot. Now it goes back to the first question Ravi asked that you've got to fill in the blanks now the rest of the way, right, Andrew, to make it like the sort of game that in March we're like, yeah, that one right there. Otherwise it just is another one that kind of fizzles into the background a bit. So they've given it a great opportunity though for it to be one of those kind of select Husker games that everyone who was there will proudly speak about, 5 years from now, and those who weren't there will say they were there.
All right. It's gonna be what
it's like the Nirvana did a concert at like Duffy's Tavern and like before Nevermind came out or something, and now everybody who was on the UNL campus at the time now says they were at that concert, I think, but I'm guessing that wasn't the case.
Didn't realize that venue held 100,000. That's
yeah, it's amazing.
What's the other? Is it the Matt Davison catch that everybody claims they were at? What's the other one? There's a football one that everybody claims they were at. I can't. It's like, no, there were not 1.4 million people at that game. I promise.
Yeah. The third deck was not filled up last night, but it was a lively crowd. The crowd that was there was great, and I also understand with the weather why it was what it was. But yeah, it was a great atmosphere. PBA is a really tough place to play. I think Big Ten teams and coaches have found out when Nebraska's playing good ball, because that crowd does get on you. It gets on the refs. It lets them know, and it was that sort of energy in the building last night.
BC, we're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. How much do you think this means for, we don't usually this far into a coach's tenure, we don't talk about kind of program defining wins or things like that, because frankly, if you haven't had one by this point, you usually don't make it that far into your tenure. But Nebraska's obviously stood by Fred Hoiberg, and it seems like that is really starting to pay off in a big way. How would you define last night's win in terms of what it means for Fred Hoiberg's tenure here at Nebraska?
Well, right now it is that signature game that stands out. There were others where they had nice wins, but it wasn't to this level, and winning at Creighton last year, you can't take away from that. I mean, that's a team that almost made the Final Four, and
sure,
Nebraska had a great day and beat them. So, I mean, you could make an argument there, but the fact that Purdue came in number one, and I really feel like, I know you guys know your hoops well. I mean, Purdue's a legit one to me, or was a number one. Like that's a once in a while there'll be that team that they're really good, but the rankings sort of fall their way for a week and they're number one. It's like, oh, that was nice. We knew they'd get knocked off in a week or two. I think people kind of suspected Purdue might stay there a while when you look at just their non-conference wins. And I mean, people can look it up. There's like Marquette, Arizona, Alabama, Tennessee, Xavier, Illinois. It's really impressive. So in that way, I don't think it's rivaled. Also, I feel like there's more energy behind this team than even when they won in Omaha last year, that they could actually make it to the, onto a bracket at this moment. And so I think it's a top one. You got to give Fred credit. He reset the way they did things a year ago. This is the second year of that. They kind of went back and changed how they're going to fill a roster out, the type of players they were bringing in. And I think Trev Alberts liked seeing that, frankly. And so it's kind of year two of the reset, I guess I would say. And in that respect, it's going pretty well at this moment.
BC, I was listening to Coach Rule last night talk in a separate interview about how everybody says they want to build, but not everyone wants to take the time to build. How cool / a major credit is it to Trev Alberts to have two coaches in Hoiberg and in Coach Rule that embrace the build?
Well, I think to succeed as a coach in this day and age, you have to want to be a builder in some ways. At the same time, you have to have like an urgency to that build. Like there's the deadlines get moved up with everything. It feels like. Now Fred's had his time to kind of work things out, obviously, but it's so different how you build now. And I think the guys who evolve with the times the best and understand, okay, I may not love like everything that college sports is right now, but through the portal and things, I'm going to figure out the best way to do it with what the situation is in front of us at this moment. And I feel like Rule, if you sat him down and said, is this your ideal version of what college sports or football should look like right now? I would guess he'd say no, and yet he knows that that's what it is. Let's work with what it is. Let's do our best with that setup and what's put before us. And I think they're trying to do that. And I think you're kind of seeing the same thing with Hoiberg. I mean, this is a team where he worked, him and his staff, Coach Lenzer and those guys worked their butts off over those couple months to get guys like Rink Mast and Bryce Williams. I mean, it's elbows out for those type of players. And Nebraska wasn't able to land like every big dog out there, like Hunter Salas, and some of these guys who at times like Nebraska fans wanted, but they kind of pinpointed some guys they had a legitimate shot to get. They worked hard on them. They saw how they could fit into the puzzle, and they worked with the system in front of us to put together a team that looks pretty good right now. So I to your question, I think you have to be a builder, but you also have to be like a timely builder,
No, I absolutely get that. And based on what you just said, it had me thinking, because we talk about how this Nebraska basketball team is built to be an NCAA tournament team this season. How about on the football side of things, though? How patient or how long do you think it will take for Nebraska football to be built to be a college football playoff team, and what we now know what it will be as a 12-team playoff?
I mean, I'm not going to make a big proclamation here because, every offseason we kind of talk ourselves into like, oh, this is going to happen. And then it's been stuck on 5 wins for a while. I do know the person who matters, Matt Rule, when you listen to him do interviews, thinks they can get a lot done pretty soon. He said as much. And so whether that can be a reality or not, I don't know. But I think they like the culture they have. I think they like the fact that, you watched the championship game the other night, and Michigan is just an example of like what it means to be dominant on both sides of the ball in the trenches, where guys can just take over a game, especially on that D line. And I feel like if there's one thing you want to be really encouraged about with Husker football, to the question you asked and trying to make that big move, is I actually did think at the end of last year on both sides of the ball, especially the D line and the trenches, they had taken a step. Like I felt like they were a better crew and better equipped to deal with the Big Ten than they had been. And that's a huge deal. Of course, the quarterback piece was missing. And so we're about to find out if they found that piece over time. There's sure a lot of hope about it, and for good reason. But I think within the trenches, they're building it in a way that they can be pretty competitive at that. I don't want to say the college football playoff level at this point, but to at least get some respect back on Nebraska's name, and you're in the postseason of some sort and making some noise again. So I do see signs that can happen.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, I want to go back to what you were talking about with kind of the nature of Fred Hoiberg building this team, because I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it didn't seem like he was necessarily interested in being a quote-unquote builder when he got here. It seemed like they were trying to do a lot of quick fixes, kind of trying to do the same type of thing that he did at Iowa State, and kind of realized, oh, hey, that's not going to work this time, and had to shift his mindset and his philosophy sort of midway. You talked about this is really year 2 of his sort of revisioned Nebraska team. Is it fair to say that like this is maybe not how he intended to do this job in the first place, but has made it work on the fly?
That's possible. That'd be a really good question to ask him in one of the next meetings with him. I do think they got some really talented players in here early on in his time at Nebraska, but they just didn't fit together right. It just wasn't the right puzzle, and sometimes it was like, Bryce McGowan's was a really entertaining player and is doing fine for himself as a basketball player, but just the way the pieces worked around him and stuff, it just didn't feel like a team to me sometimes. And this does now, the last 2 years, like it, whether it's good or bad, you feel like all the pieces kind of work off each other in a way that wasn't previously. And so, I give them credit for switching on the fly. They definitely did some of that, because there's no doubt that it's a different, I don't know, it's just a different type of squad that they have now. And they've really emphasized, when they go into the portal, finding those guys who have been in college basketball maybe 4 or 5 years, who are pretty productive, and yet they're not the guys like everybody's pointing to. Like Bryce Williams had a really good career at Charlotte, and maybe not as good as he even hoped, but he came on at the end of last season, was like the CBI MVP or whatever. And even before that was balling out, and this staff realized that they thought the best of him was still to come. He's 6'7" and can do all the, score at all the levels. And then Rink Mast, I think they believed even before this season, they got an absolute steal of a guy who is just like a workhorse. He can shoot it from outside, and he just gave Edey fits last night. I mean, there was help on the defensive side with what they did against Edey, but Rink Mast played his butt off in that game. And he's just found the right guys for this time, and now they got to finish it. I don't want to, I hope we don't come back here 2 weeks and they've lost, you've lost 4 or 5 and all that. That there are dips in the season, but right now it does feel really good about the roster they have and like how they're playing together.
BC, we got about 4.5 minutes left. I want to change gears and talk a little football now. We're in that window for Jamal Banks when at least the timetable for his decision is supposed to happen from this Wednesday to Friday period here. Where are you at in terms of where you think he's leaning? And if he doesn't end up at Nebraska, where do you kind of sit in terms of offensive completement from before the signings this weekend to where you are now?
I think if they add him, they really did the best they could as far as pieces with the numbers they have, because there aren't a lot of numbers to work with. So you've got Dowdell. Nayer's a really interesting player because Isaiah Nayer, he's hurt at Texas, and maybe you wish there would have been a little more production this last season, but he had that ACL injury in August of last year. And just his capabilities and the way Sarkisian talked to him about him prior to that injury makes me think there's a very high ceiling there if he can meet it, going forward. With Banks, I don't know. I'm optimistic about it for Nebraska. I last messaged him on Sunday, and I've kind of left it there with him because he told me, at the earliest I'm deciding midweek, and at the latest I want to decide it, as you mentioned, at the end of the week. And so today we're there now, I guess, so we'll see if he announces anything. I do know Michigan was interested in him, and it was kind of a weird deal because last week, of course, all of Michigan's attention is on something else. And so you're not getting a lot of information about really what happened there. And I don't know if there's still interest. He visited a lot of places before Christmas break too, like good schools, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Purdue, Minnesota. So he's got options on the table. But he felt wanted at Nebraska. He liked their blueprint, and he certainly had good things to say. So I think there is a chance there. We'll see.
BC, if they don't land Banks for some reason, do you think they're still in the market for another transfer portal wide receiver? Or do you think they kind of look it through them and they go, yeah, no, we're okay with this?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know if it would happen in this cycle at this point, but maybe that's something after the spring you revisit. Although it'd be really nice to have that person if it's a junior or senior who you want to help the young guys and has been around the block to be there for spring ball. So I think there is a big, benefit right now if that guy comes at this moment. But yeah, I wouldn't just close the door on the idea, because if there's an open spot, you feel like now, who's to say there wouldn't be that, several months from now. But it feels like it's down to a couple guys. We'll see if there's a defender that could still be in the picture or not. But I think it's one or two spaces left at most, and maybe there's going to be none. That's always a possibility in these deals. They're very fluid.
That's Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate your time as always, and we will catch up with you again next week.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Appreciate you, BC.
That's our guy, BC from Husker 24/7. Good stuff there.
Always.
As always. Another place you can find good stuff.
What's that?
No.
That's funny. That was good. That was great timing, because he could have easily still been on the stream, and we just turned our attention to each other, and we both paused. That was good, Shane.
That was good. The other good stuff you can see that's coming up 2 weeks from today, Pro Football Federation kicks off here in Omaha, Nebraska. Jeez, what am I doing today? Pro Volleyball Federation.
Hey, we're at that hump in the week. We're on the downhill train. We're almost there.
Omaha Supernovas versus Atlanta Vibe at the CHI Health Center, January 24th, 7 p.m. first serve. Get your season tickets or single game tickets at supernovas.com. You've got elite talent, world-class talent, NCAA champions, All-Americans, Olympians. Join the volleyball movement sweeping across the country and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas. Again, go to supernovas.com for tickets. Coming up next, we got Kevin Sjuts from 1011 News in Lincoln here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and we're on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube if you want to see our bright and shining faces on this Wednesday morning. We are joined now by our friend Kevin Sjuts on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. He's the sports director for 1011 News in Lincoln. Kevin, how are you doing this morning?
We're doing all right. Not as good as Fred Hoiberg, but doing pretty good for a Wednesday.
I don't know. I mean, weren't you there? Were you rushing the floor? Did you have your big camera on the shoulder? Take me through it.
Okay. Since you asked, Andrew, there are few things as challenging as a videographer in sports as a court storming, because you're posed with the question or the decision, do you go in or do you hang back? Because, of course, the TV shot that everybody's used to seeing with the court storming is a high angle, watch everybody run on the floor onto the court, and then you say, look at all those idiots, they can't go anywhere now. Or you go in, and if you go in, you got to go first. So if you go back and watch the video, got to mid-court about the same time as Keisei Tominaga and Josiah Alex. So I went in, I put on the running shoes, I sprinted there, and once you're in, you can't move. So my body temperature went up like 40 degrees in the span of 30 seconds. Everybody was there. You're getting knocked around, and I'm trying to hold the camera up above my head, because if you have it on your shoulder, the thing's just going to whack you in the head, and I might get concussed. And it was just madness, but it was at the end of it, you're like, that was fun, but that was really hard. But what a really cool moment for Nebraska.
We're talking with Kevin Sjuts from 1011 News in Lincoln. Kevin, before the court storming, kind of take us through the atmosphere of that game. What was the energy like in the building? Because it translated, I thought, pretty well on TV that it was a pretty amped up crowd. But were there any moments, like in the second half when it gets down to 51-50? Could you feel some tension in the building? What was the atmosphere like overall?
There was hope from the very beginning. And I heard about the Peacock hot mic incident where Ravi Hummel and the guys on the broadcast were maybe dogging on the crowd. I think that must have been really early on. Some empty seats at the top. And, Nebraska fans, sometimes they show up late. And, of course, the weather was a factor as well. It wasn't a sellout, but it didn't take long. It took about 7 rink match points early on for people to get pretty juiced up about the game. And as it wore on, the energy continued to increase. And, Ravi, like you said, in the second half, really got charged up, and the closer it got to zeros, more energy there was, and there was more buzz and feeling of like, wow, this is going to happen. And, you know, K-State Tominaga doing the K-State Tominaga antics after each made threes. Like that just, it fed into the energy in the building, and it was rocking. My ears were ringing, and I can't think of too many times inside Pinnacle Bank Arena, you know, in the January side of the schedule that it's been that charged up as it was last night.
Kevin, can you think back and point to a moment where it went from sort of hopeful and excited to, oh, this is actually going to happen? Was it that last Tominaga 3, that absurd one with about 4 minutes left? Or like, was there a moment where you kind of felt a palpable change of, oh, this is happening?
It was the Josiah Alex 3 for me.
Okay.
I mean, he took Zach Edey out and he hit a 3 and he posed down the court. And you're like, if Josiah Alex is going to make that bucket in that moment, and he shot it with so much confidence, because that was in the stretch, you know, the threes that were made in the second half and shooting 61% from beyond the arc. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, that'll help.
Nobody's going to beat you. Nobody's going to beat you when you shoot 61% from beyond the arc at home with that environment. So for me, it was the Alex 3 because it had come in a span in which C.J. Wilcher had hit a 3. Bryce Williams makes a 3 shortly after that. Casey had hit a couple of 3s. So just the batch of 3s that were made. And plus, I believe that kind of stemmed the tide because there wasn't really a moment in the second half where Nebraska went on the quintessential 5 to 7 minute scoring drought. Every time Purdue made a run, Nebraska had an answer. And I think that, to me, is ultimately, from a basketball perspective, what I remember about that performance from the Huskers was they never went on the big drought. And each time that Purdue hit a couple of trays or went on a 7-0 run, the Huskers had an answer, and they made it their night. And it was a special one.
Kevin, I want to change gears and talk about the high school scene for a moment because it feels like we haven't spoken to you in about a month now. We'll start with the boys over the girls. I know the girls in Lincoln are just going absolutely berserk. No, let's actually start with the girls because of what it looks like in Class A right now. You have nearly every Lincoln school in the rankings, the one that's not as Lincoln Southeast, but they're receiving votes. What is in the water in Lincoln that's impacting girls basketball right now?
Well, this isn't new. You know, girls basketball, though the championships have likely most recently been won by Omaha area schools, Lincoln contends very well in Class A in girls basketball, and this year is no different. Lincoln Southwest is, you know, at the top of the cut. They got Kennedy Williams, who's a really talented player, and she has some nice supporting pieces around her. But Lincoln Southeast just beat Lincoln Southwest, and Lincoln Northeast has a player who's going to Illinois State, and she's been starting for 3 years. Washington is her last name. She's a fantastic player. So I don't think this is a 1 year look at 2024 with girls basketball in Lincoln. This has been happening for a while, and now it's all just like it's pretty even across the top as well. And I should give a shout out to Pius as well. Pius is having a really nice season on the girls' side.
Now, on the boys' side, Kevin, Lincoln Southeast, so the team receiving votes in Class A for the girls is the one that's ranked on the boys' side. Are they the one that you had marked on your bingo card? Because I want to say that would be a no for you.
Not at all. I mean, they had some players transfer out of the program. So our outlook on Lincoln Southeast boys hoops this year was down. They just got lost in the shuffle. Of course, Lincoln Southwest is going to grab a lot of the headlines with Braden Frager, a future Husker. And Southeast just kind of lurked in the weeds. And then once the hack hit, you know, keep this in mind. Lincoln Southeast won the Heartland Athletic Conference tournament despite having to play one of the bunny bracket games. They had to play on the opening day when there are 4 teams that receive a first-round bye. And they just got hot at the right time, and they've taken that momentum here into the 2024 portion of their schedule. Southeast, I'd be wrong to say they have to be the best team in Lincoln right now because their resume proves that. And Lincoln Pius X has Trayson Anderson. He's a Division I player who is one of the best bigs in the state, in my opinion. But you have some other teams in Lincoln that can all beat each other up. And I think that we're going to have a pretty wild final 2 months of the high school boys season.
Kevin, you mentioned right now Lincoln Southeast probably the best boys team in the city. By the end of the year, do you think they'll be able to continue that momentum and kind of take the quote-unquote city crown by the end of the season? Or do you think Pius or Southwest will be able to kind of catch back up to where we expected them to be at the start of the season?
Man, that's a great question. I think just because of the parity across the capital city, these teams might start beating each other up over the next couple of weeks. So I don't know if you're asking me to say who's going to win the regular season city championship. The money is on Southeast, but, man, the odds are not that different from Team A to Team E. I think Lincoln North Star needs to be in the discussion as well. And that's what's kind of exciting about this time of year and the way the season is shaping up to be right now here in Lincoln.
That's Kevin Sjuts. He's the sports director for 1011 News in Lincoln. Kevin, I know pretty much everybody that was at that game last night is exhausted, so get a little rest this morning. We appreciate you getting up with us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you much, boys.
We appreciate you, Kevin.
That's Kevin Sjuts from 1011 News in Lincoln on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Really good stuff there from Kevin. And, man, I could just imagine him holding his camera over his head while he's storming the court.
Well, Kevin probably wishes he was 20 years younger running out on that court.
Why am I imagining him as like John Cusack with the boombox over his head? Like that's like just I can say anything. I'm just with the camera. Yeah. That's how I'm imagining our guy Kevin Sjuts.
It's a full extension thing because that's the best way to get your panoramic view.
Got to get those shoulders tired. That's some impressive
Those cameras
work.
Are not light.
No, they're super heavy. That's impressive work by our guy Kevin Sjuts. More of Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me. We're on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. And we are, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well. And we're brought to you by our friends at Dyer Law. If you've been hurt in a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. Maybe you got a little fender bender after the snowstorm yesterday. Hopefully you're okay. But if you need some help, call the Dyer Law team at 402-393-7529 or visit dyer.law to chat with trusted professionals about your personal injury claim. That's DYER.law. Wanted to switch gears a little bit here. We've been talking a lot about Nebraska basketball for good reason. Got some Nebraska football in there with our guy Brian Christopherson. But we had kind of a surprising, at least to you, and
not just me.
A lot of people, yeah. I know you were particularly surprised by it, though. I was a little bit. I thought they really liked this guy, but the Titans moved on from Mike Vrabel yesterday, which was a little bit later in the day, a little bit later usually those all come down on Monday. But Mike Vrabel gone from the Tennessee Titans. We're still not nearly at the number that Adam Schefter thought we would be at in terms of guys that got let go. A lot of guys like Matt Eberflus seem to save their jobs late in the season with the Bears, and we still don't totally know what's going on with Bill Belichick, although I wonder if this Mike Vrabel thing has maybe some impact on how they end up handling that in New England.
He easily could, because he is a disciple of Bill Belichick. Now, there's plenty of things that I can land on as to why I'm surprised Tennessee went this direction. One, yes, the reaction from the league. I remember reading an article last night, and I believe the line read, "Yeah, I got a text back from a league source that came back with, 'You're blanking me.'" And that's kind of how I felt.
Yeah.
Whenever I saw the update come through, I'm like, wait a second here. I know Tennessee hasn't had a good last 2 seasons, but how much of that is on Mike Vrabel? How much of that is not just on the team and underperforming at that? Vrabel hasn't had a really solid quarterback over those last 2 seasons. Like Ryan Tannehill had like a really good season 3 years ago when they were making kind of that surprise playoff run. But then Tannehill really didn't amount to much after that. This season, he was all over the place with who can be a consistent starter for this team. They landed on Will Levis eventually, but Will Levis didn't light the world on fire either. He had a win or two that were pretty good, but that's about it. You can only have so many quote-unquote good wins when you win 5 games in a season. But it is completely shocking. Mike Vrabel had that team on the same page, right? Everybody was on the same page. He's a player's coach, and he's been very successful as a coach in Tennessee outside of these last 2 seasons. So the fact that they moved on from him so quickly, and I say so quickly because there's so many other names in the NFL that I think should be on or should be blacklisted than Mike Vrabel at the moment. But the fact that they were just like, nope, it's on Mike Vrabel, that's it. And they don't like take a deeper look into what the root problems are of this team shows me that Tennessee isn't led well from the top.
Yeah, they've obviously struggled the last couple years with the quarterback play. Tannehill got banged up. I think the last 2 years he's been pretty banged up, and he's kind of just getting to a point in his career where he's not going to be as effective anymore. He definitely had the best years of his career under Mike Vrabel, especially when we go back to like 2019 when they made the AFC Championship game and were really, really good in that year as well. But I don't think this is a guy that's going to be on the market very long.
No,
especially if New England ends up moving on from Bill Belichick. They had an initial meeting, Kraft and Belichick did on Monday. No decision was made. He did say something that I thought was really interesting, though, because Bill Belichick said, I'm still under contract with the Patriots. And so obviously they didn't fire him. But what I'm wondering is, are they going to try and trade him? Because,
which is so funny to me that coaches can just get traded.
And we've seen
it's so funny.
A handful of times, not a ton, but you see it some. But I would imagine, okay, the Patriots, their organization has kind of been built on getting value out of things. If you've got this coach that other people want still, and you want to move on, you probably want to get some value out of him, even if it, maybe it's not a ton of draft compensation, but maybe you get a couple picks that you let whoever else is in charge try and rebuild this roster, because this roster needs a lot of help. They haven't drafted well for several years now, and a lot of that is on Belichick. But I think if he goes somewhere else to a situation where he's not in charge of personnel anymore, he could definitely still be successful. I think he's still got one of the best defensive minds in the game, but that makes this Mike Vrabel thing really interesting, because I think he would be by far the leader in the clubhouse to replace Belichick. And I wonder if that's maybe why there's some ambiguity on the Patriots side as well at this point, because maybe Vrabel being available tilts the scales one way or another on what they decide to do with Belichick. Because, listen, it seems like they're sort of at a crossroads, and the only thing keeping Bill Belichick in his job right now is kind of history and nostalgia rather than current performance. Because current performance, if he was anybody else and hadn't had 6 Super Bowls over the last 24 years, that dude's fired in a heartbeat, right? Current performance does not indicate he should keep his job. Past performance and appreciation of what he's brought to the franchise, that's why he still has the job.
Well, and you have to think this too, like how much better can you be without X person? Like that's the question you need to ask yourself before you fire somebody. And the Titans just got a heck of a lot worse by firing a guy like Vrabel, who's had success there, who knows how to build something special, and frankly knows how to outcoach another guy on the opposing sidelines. I saw him do that a number of times, especially when they made that playoff run. He outcoached everybody, and he will continue to do that because he's a lifelong learner and he likes to win. I want to make a clarification too. When I said, because normally when you call somebody a disciple, they come from a coaching tree. when I called Vrabel a disciple of Belichick, he played for Belichick.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant by that. So yeah, there's probably different terminology that I could have used there to get that point across. But what I will add to your Belichick point, am I wrong? Did I hear it correctly that Belichick is willing to take like a lesser role with the Patriots in some capacity?
That's what they're saying. I wonder, call this maybe a crazy theory, right? I wonder if they're putting that out there so that if they are trying to trade him, whoever is in the market doesn't think they have to give him total control. Like if he's willing to take a lesser role with the Patriots, maybe teams will be more willing to try and trade for him.
And that could be. I guess I thought about that move in particular because it seems like teams know ahead of time of who's staying and who's getting fired, or,
I think they have a good
who's
idea.
getting released and who's going to be a free agent someday. I wonder if the Patriots already knew that the Titans were on the fence about Vrabel.
Yeah.
So they made that claim so that maybe that could help entice Vrabel to end up with Belichick. And now instead of, moving on from, the GOAT of coaching in their eyes and in a lot of people's eyes.
I mean, I think, he's probably the best NFL coach we've ever seen. I don't know how. I don't think that's
you
a hot
bring
take.
in Mike Vrabel, who has already been groomed as a player by Belichick. Now you can, get in his head as a coach. It's kind of like when, and it's a lot different, but like when Coach Rule got to Nebraska, what was the first thing that he did? He sat down with Tom Osborne. He wanted to learn from one of the greatest coaching minds out there. Maybe that's a similar situation to what the Patriots can get out of a Vrabel-Belichick coaching relationship.
Yeah, and I wonder if you just need a clean start, though, if you're New England, because I don't know. Like at some point, things have just run their course, and it kind of seems like that's where they're at in New England now. If for whatever reason they keep Belichick and he's able to make them a contender again, then that may be the most impressive thing he's done as their coach. Because right now their roster's not good, their talent's not good, their coaching staff is not good because he's hired too many of like his buddies. And, there's a rumor that Josh McDaniels might come back again, and it's for round 3 with Belichick and his crew there. And, his sons, I think his son's still on the staff. He has this sort of inner circle of people that he trusts and doesn't go outside of it. Now, Vrabel probably would be in that inner circle, but I wonder at some point if you're just like, hey, we need to move on. Because Belichick is 71, 72. Even if it starts to get better, what's the future there? I mean, you don't have a long-term future there with Belichick anymore. Do you want to have to fire the greatest coach in NFL history? Probably not. That's why I think a trade is enticing to them, because then you can save the dignity of not having to fire Bill Belichick. You get some compensation in return. Belichick probably feels better about the situation, about going to another opportunity where he can try and be successful again. At a certain point, I think you just have to say, hey, this has been terrific. It's time for everybody to move on. And that's where I feel like the Patriots are at. We'll see, though, because, again, it's hard to cut ties with a legend. I mean, I saw it happen. I saw it happen with Florida State and Bobby Bowden, and it took a while for those wounds to heal. We saw it here at Nebraska with Frank Solich, Hall of Famer Frank Solich. But it seems those wounds have finally healed as well. Coming up next, we're going to talk to our very own Anna Bellinghausen. Creighton played a basketball game last night, too. People forget. We will talk a little bit about that with her coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln for this hour number 3. We are brought to you by our friends at Dingman's Collision Center. 4 great Omaha area locations, family owned and operated for over 25 years. They've got the latest technology. They can work on anything you've got for them. They're working on Andrew's car right now as we speak. And they've been voted first place Best of Omaha for 18 years running. They are a name and a family you can trust. And they care about the place that they live. They give back with every car repaired. Go to dingmans.com for more information, not just on the places they give back to, but also on whatever services they can provide for you as well. Make sure you go check that out at dingmans.com. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is our colleague Anna Bellinghausen. Anna, how are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you guys?
What's up, AB?
How we doing? How's the car, Andrew?
The car is fine. She's getting taken care of as we speak. I appreciate you asking, though. She was in a world of hurt for about a month and a half. She's kind of like a dog. Like, you know how a dog never tells you she's injured? Like, you know, if your dog like tore something in its leg, like it'll always act like it has nothing's happened to it. That's also because dogs can't speak, but neither can my car. And my car had some damage for about a month and a half. And, you know, I finally took her to the vet and she's getting worked on at Dingman's. I'm telling you, she's good. She's going to come back fully solid. I feel like sometimes, so you know, those like Carfax commercials where they're like, hey, here's the same car next to each other. And then they like crush one of the cars down and be like, this is its actual value. I feel like that's what my car looks like.
That's all right. I'm sure our friends will take care of you over there. You know, the Blue Jays last night got a little work in as well, a very little work in against the DePaul Blue Demons. And just kind of from the start, it looked like Creighton, at least they didn't play with their food, I think is how I heard someone put it. What were your thoughts as you watched that game? Creighton got out to that early lead. Baylor Shireman had those 5 first-half three-pointers. What were your early thoughts as you watched Creighton kind of get out to a dominating lead and then just keep DePaul at well more than arm's length all night?
Yeah, I think it was something Blue Jays were waiting for in the first half great start, because it's something that we hadn't really seen in the past few games of a strong first half start. So I think that was really encouraging. And then the only having 6 turnovers, I think, is huge for this team, and just correcting those wrongs from previous games and just miscues, miscommunication. It looked like this team was all on the same page and felt like they were really playing together, had a dominating win and another important conference win again for confidence. And not only that, but also the resume. And they did get a little help from Nebraska last night too.
For sure. Anna, you mentioned those turnovers. That's been an area of concern against some of Creighton's better opponents so far this year. Obviously, DePaul does not fall on that list of some of their better opponents. So how much can you take away from this game, whether it be the turnovers, whether it be some of the ball movement or scoring distribution that we saw between kind of the big three? How much can you take from this game that you think actually can translate to better teams?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but again, it's a conference opponent on the road too, in a different environment. So I think you have to put that into account. And I still would take away that this team's moving better with the ball, and I think regardless of opponent, you still have to do it. I mean, you think back to those early games and the lobs that whoever was throwing into Kalkbrenner was kind of just not on the same page there. I think that's been cleaned up a little bit. So I think regardless of opponent, it's still a great step in the right direction for Creighton and making sure they have more assists than turnovers. I think that's obviously a key. And yeah, I was impressed with the ball movement. I don't think you can belittle it necessarily, because it was a team that's not as good in the Big East Conference. But again, you still got to show up when it counts against those top tier Big East opponents that they'll see pretty soon here. But they've got a nice January slate to get things rolling.
Now, that's a good thing to look at, Anna, because, you know, something I paid close attention to were the 2 losses in Big East play to kind of open things up, and how Creighton found a way to respond. And yes, they were against a couple of lower ended opponents in DePaul and Georgetown, but then you go back to even that win against Providence, which was a good one despite not having Bryce Hopkins in the lineup. And, you know, we talked a little bit about body language to open today, about how Nebraska's body language just looks different, how it makes them a superior team because of the way they look like they're gelling. The body language of Creighton has also shifted since those first 2 losses in the Big East. And I really noticed it in the Providence win when Ashworth got involved. Because if you remember, I was like, I think I told you this either before the holiday break or right after, where I wanted to see Creighton get their non-stars more involved. And when he hit that 3 late against Providence, you saw the reaction from Mac. You saw the reaction from the bench, the team on the court. It just seems like the attitude of Creighton is just different right now.
Yeah, I think it comes down to attitude quite a bit in this game of basketball. It's anyone's game any night, and it's really about what team shows up. So I think getting Ashworth going, he didn't have the greatest game last night, still 7 assists though. So he was still involved in facilitating, but you look at a guy like Trey Alexander, who had his little slump, if you want to call it that, and then he comes back and he's a little bit more consistent and getting up into 17, 20 points. But I think another guy they have to get going is Ryan Kalkbrenner, and that's a guy that I do look at his body language for, because I think coming into Creighton, he'll even attest to this. He wasn't a vocal leader. He wasn't a guy that would speak up a lot, but I think he was really pushed into that role. I think McDermott really challenged him to step up and be a vocal leader. And also Baylor Shireman, because last year, the biggest thing I noticed was Baylor was kind of timid at times and not taking shots he might normally would, because I think he was just so worried about wanting to fit into that role and not overstepping his boundaries. And Coach Max has spoken to this in his press conferences too and talked to me about it. Just he's taken on a different role this year, and I think the keys are almost in his hand. Any timeout, anytime there's a break during play, he's always going like this with his hands, bringing the team in together. And those are the little things that you look at when you talk about body language of, okay, who's in control of this team? Who is the guy they're going to look at when things are going bad, especially when it's on the road or someone's not having a great shooting night. But yeah, I would attest a lot of that to Baylor. And I think there has been a shift, Andrew. I think you're right in the fact that there's just been more confidence with the team. I mean, to start off with 2 conference losses when you're preseason number 8, that's not a good feeling whatsoever. And they've been there, done that with the expectations, but it still hurts when you fall out of the top 25. And I think these guys will play with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as they did last year. So I think it's almost a good thing that they fell out and get right back in there in the 22-23 and can find a way to win ball games down the stretch. And the ones that matter are in March. So you just got to figure it out till then.
We're talking with Anna Bellinghausen of Hurrdat Sports. Anna, they've got this stretch coming up here, and it maybe isn't the typical murderer's row of Big East teams, but you've got St. John's, who's won 4 of their last 5. They're all of a sudden playing really good basketball. Then you go at UConn, which is going to be a bear, obviously. You go at Seton Hall, which has 3 top 25 wins in their last 5 games, and they're playing really good basketball under Coach Holloway all of a sudden. This is a really interesting stretch for them before they get a little bit of a breather at the end of the month and into February a little bit. How do you think they're playing right now as opposed to maybe a few games ago, and how do you think they're going to navigate this stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's better, and the stat I always will go back to is turnovers, because that shows you how on point this team is with each other. How are they playing together? Is there miscommunication? What's happening in that realm? Because we know Creighton's such a good team with ball movement. They're so unselfish. They pretty much have an assist on every made basket almost every night. So those are the kind of stats that I look at that can sort of indicate that. But honestly, I think it does go back to that body language talk and confidence overall, because I think this team is an emotional one. I think they show that. They wear their hearts on their sleeves, if you will. So I think that is a big indicator. But as for maneuvering this schedule, I mean, you look at St. John's, and that's not a team to overlook, like you mentioned, Ravi. It is at home. I think it's going to be a sellout, so I think that will help. But then you go at UConn, and I think that's maybe their biggest test of the year, I would say. I think that'll maybe either expose some things for them of what they think's working really well right now, these past 3 wins, or it's going to continue to uplift that confidence if they get a win in Stores, which I think would catapult this season even further for Creighton and how they're feeling right now. But yeah, I like how the schedule's set up, and the fact that they don't have 3 or 4 top 25 games in a row like it felt like they did last year, maybe even more. But I think it's set up in a good way to where they'll be battle tested, but they'll also, not be too down on themselves if there's 1 or 2 losses in a row. I think that's a huge difference between losing 6 in a row. You think back to last year versus, hey, maybe we'll drop one to UConn. We dropped one to Marquette and Villanova, but hey, we can get back on track here and maybe pull off a couple games that we didn't think we would get, especially with UConn.
And I'm going to ask one more, and then we're going to play a little trivia with you. We're going to kick Ravi out and get this thing going. As you kind of like looked across the Big East there, it had me thinking, you had mentioned Creighton was top 10 to open the year. And if people had to guess, they probably put Creighton at third best in the Big East behind Marquette and UConn to open things up. Where do you think Creighton is at today? Like, take out the conference records, the overall records, like whatever, because Marquette is middle of the pack and, UConn's at the top, which makes sense. But where do you think Creighton is? Are they borderline 3? Are they below that number? Where do you have them?
Yeah, I think you asked me this, like a month and a half ago, and I think I said UConn, Creighton, Marquette. That's tough to say. I mean, obviously Marquette beat Creighton, so it's tough to say that Creighton's a better team there. But again, it was on the road, so I'll be curious to see what happens when the Golden Eagles come into town. But it's tough to say. I still think Connecticut's the clear number one. So I'm probably going to stick with that. Maybe you say Marquette and Creighton are a little bit more even right now. But yeah, it's tough to say. Big East is just really any given night with any team. So it's a tough question to answer. Can I have more time, Andrew? That's my answer.
Yeah.
Can I let you know in like March?
Yeah, I'll give you another month and a half.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Then I'll have a real good answer.
All right, let's do some trivia. Ravi, leave the studio, take your phone. But Shane normally comes to get you anyway, so it really doesn't matter, I guess. Shane, can you play some music for it? Get us the trivia music going.
I would love to play some trivia music.
Anna, how confident are you feeling today? Because you tied Ravi last night.
I did.
Questions. He got you in the tiebreaker.
Yeah. See, I don't know. It depends how Andrew Rogers is feeling this morning. I feel like you really want to take me down on this trivia, so I feel like these are going to be really difficult.
We'll see. Remember, sometimes I stay relevant. Sometimes I get a little adventurous. Here's your first question. Anna, 3 players of the 21st century, that's 2000 and 2001 and beyond, have been crowned NFL MVPs that didn't play the position of quarterback. Adrian Peterson was the most recent. Sean Alexander was the first. Who was smashed in between? Was it Randy Moss, LaDainian Tomlinson, or Chris Johnson?
Shoot. Chris Johnson? I don't know. I'm going to go LT.
LT. All right. Question number 2. Anna, Tiger Woods is the youngest golfer ever to win the Masters. How old was he when he did it? Was he 20, 21, or 22?
I should know this because I watched his documentary, but I'm going to go 22.
So if you missed that question, the people in the stream are going to come after you. They're going to come get you. All right, question number 3. Anna, which NFL team has won the most playoff games? Is it the Patriots, the Cowboys, or the Packers?
So you would think Patriots. Oh, but you got to think history probably. I'm gonna go Packers.
Didn't sound very confident there.
I don't know. It could be Patriots, but I feel like that might just be recency bias with Brady. But
okay, fair enough. Tiebreaker question for you. What is the average head speed of Tiger's driver moving at when he makes contact with the ball? So this is in miles per hour. What do you think?
Oh, I'm just giving it to you? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remember the tiebreaker is closest to?
Yeah, I know. I'm going to go – I have no idea. 98 miles per hour.
Thank you, Anna. Bring Ravi back in, Shane. The king has arrived.
Oh,
fashionably late. Anna, how you feeling?
Not good. I mean, I'm never going to say I feel good about this trivia stuff, Andrew.
She says, not good today, Ravi. That's how she's feeling.
That's how I felt last time, though.
You did say that last week.
Yeah, Anna, you lowballed me last week and said you didn't feel good about it either. So I don't know if I believe you.
Okay, Ravi, you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Question number 1, Ravi, remember you get one Hail Mary.
Okay.
3 players of the 21st century have been crowned NFL MVPs that didn't play the position of quarterback. Adrian Peterson was the most recent.
Yep.
Sean Alexander was the first. Who was smashed in between?
Oh, God, come on now. Okay, those were the 2 I definitely knew.
You're welcome.
Out of the 3. How dare you? All right, hold on. I can do this. So, Alexander was early 2000s. Adrian Peterson was like, 8, 10, somewhere in there. So, who are we looking at? I don't want to use my Hail Mary this early, but I'm going to. Give me my options.
All right, your options are Randy Moss, LaDainian Tomlinson, or Chris Johnson.
Oh, dang it. That didn't help me that much. Nice. So Chris Johnson had the 2,000 yards.
Like Michael Penix throwing to Roma Dunze in the first half.
Right.
Didn't help him very much.
I know Chris Johnson had that 2,000-yard season, but I don't think he won the MVP. I'm going to go with LaDainian. He deserved it if he didn't get it.
Ravi's award.
Yes. Ravi's MVP, my personal record book.
All right, Ravi, question number 2. Tiger Woods is the youngest golfer ever to win the Masters. How old was he when he did it?
Okay, it was 1997.
Which only helps you if you know when he was born.
Make him, he's currently 48, which means 97 was, so he was he 21? Is that right? 97 was 27 years ago. I'm going to say he was, I'm going to say he was 22 years old.
Question number 3. Which NFL team has won the most playoff games?
Ooh, like ever?
Ever.
NFL team won the most playoff games ever. So I feel like this is going to skew recent because the playoffs are longer than they used to be. I'm going to go Patriots here.
And the tiebreaker question.
Okay.
What is the average head speed of Tiger's driver what is Tiger's driver's head speed moving at when he makes contact with the ball in miles per hour?
Okay, this is the tiebreaker. All right, so I think the really good exit velos are in the high hundreds. The club speed, I think, is less than that. I'm guessing, I want to say 112. I don't feel good today. I'll be honest. That was a tough one. I feel like you're ratcheting up the intensity on me a little bit.
Let's go through the answers. Okay. What makes me laugh there is you said the head speed is high hundreds, and then you went 112.
No, I said exit velo. So the ball coming out.
Okay, okay.
The ball coming out is what
all right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. I forgive you. All right, question number 1. Anna, you ready to go? You ready to see if you won?
I'm ready.
I don't feel good today, Anna. That was a tough one.
All right, guys, 3 players of the 21st century have been crowned NFL MVPs that didn't play the position of quarterback. Adrian Peterson was the most recent. That was 2012.
Oh, okay.
Sean Alexander was the first. That was 2005. Who was smashed in between? Was it Randy Moss, LaDainian Tomlinson, or Chris Johnson? You both said LT. You both are correct.
Okay, nice.
Question number 2. Tiger Woods is the youngest golfer ever to win the Masters. How old was he when he did it? Was he 20 years old, 21 years old, or 22 years old? You both said 22. You both are incorrect.
Is he 21?
He was 21.
Gosh,
21.
I added one. Dang it.
Well, you did what, like, the perfect thing, because who knows when his birthday
Right,
actually
yeah.
was.
Like, I knew how old
so
he
was.
was.
He 22 yet?
Yes.
Was he still 21? You got to remember, I think Tiger was born in December, and the Masters are before.
Yeah,
in
it's in
August.
The Masters
April?
is in.
Was it in August during COVID? I
It's
think
in
it is
April. It's normally
April.
April. Yeah.
So he was in the front.
Dang
end of
it.
that. And question number 3, tied at 1 apiece. Which NFL team has won the most playoff games all time? Is it the Patriots, the Cowboys, or the Packers? Anna, you said the Packers. Ravi, you said the Patriots.
I did.
The answer is the Patriots.
Yes.
Oh, I knew it.
Yes.
The Cowboys have actually played the most playoff games.
Right. Yeah.
But haven't won the most. And the Packers I threw in there because they won the first Super Bowl. So sorry, Anna, I tricked you.
That's literally what I was thinking about.
But don't worry, Anna. You still would have lost because the tiebreaker question of Tiger's average head speed for his driver when he makes contact with the ball is 122 miles per hour. Anna said 98. Ravi said 112.
Okay. I feel okay about that.
Anna, right now you're 0 for 2, but you'll get them back eventually.
I will.
That was a tough
I'm
one.
going to swing in Anna's wheelhouse at one point in time, like where I
Yes,
ask Royals
please,
questions
Oh.
and I ask a lot of maybe I'll ask some College World Series questions.
That'd be
Okay.
great. Yeah,
Ravi
do that.
could
Do that.
handle,
I
but
think I could-
Anna lived and breathed those moments as a child.
I think I could hang in the College World Series. That was kind of my wheelhouse for a long time. Royals might be tough. I was a big like Joe Randa guy in the early 2000s, but that
Ravi, I need you to make sure that next time we do trivia, you look up all of Anna's videos because maybe the question is, who was the last person Anna interviewed?
I might have.
Ooh, yeah. I don't
I
even
might-
know who that is, honestly.
I was gonna say, she wouldn't even get that one right.
She's like, was it a supernova?
I might
Was it
have to
somebody else?
hit the books a little on my Royals trivia. That's
Mhm.
that's a good one there. So don't worry, I got plenty of resources I can tap for my Royals info.
There you
So
go.
no, I'm sure. Listen, I feel like you guys are going to start skewing these away from me to try and get me an L here.
No,
Yeah,
I would never do that.
It feels like that's what's happening. It's all right. It's all right. Listen, you sit on the top of the mountain, people are going to come for you.
And you know what? Just like you, forgetting how to say words today. You've
Yeah.
been on the top of Everest all day.
I have. It's oxygen depletion. That's why I can't say anything right today. Anna, we appreciate you joining us as always, even though you didn't come hang out with us in person today. That's okay.
Yeah, we get it. We get it.
We'll give
Yeah.
you
Shane actually put deodorant on today too.
It's
We'll
fine.
we'll give you a
chose not
pass
to
today,
come.
but we'll check in. We'll check in with you again next week. Anna, have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
See you, AB.
That's Anna Bellinghausen. Coming up next, you mentioned Tiger Woods there a couple
I?
times in that trivia. There was some big Tiger News Woods this week, and I'll be honest, it had me a little nostalgic for my childhood when I heard it.
Maybe
and,
a little somber.
a
as
little,
well.
yeah, maybe just we're very reflective over his career. We'll get to that next here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. There we go. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me. We are live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and for hour number 3, we're on KFOR in Lincoln as we come down to about the last half hour of the show here. We do have a little bit of breaking news, I suppose. There's a lot of Chicago Bears fans here in, the studio. As I'm
A
sitting-
lot. 33% of the people in this building are Bears fans.
Listen,
right now.
if that was true of the entire population of Omaha, that's a lot of Bears fans.
That is.
I don't think it is, but we've got – no, I was going to say there's a lot of Bears fans in Omaha because there are. Chicago, it's a pretty close I feel like most of the Bears fans in Omaha are a little older, though. They're like people that were
they are
memorable or like of –
Oh, I'm not memorable. Sick.
no, they could remember when they were really good in the 80s. I think those are the people in Omaha that are Bears fans.
Robbie,
now.
I don't live in the past. I don't live in the 80s.
You never lived in the 80s, actually.
Actually, only lived in the 90s for like 3 years.
I was say physically, you did not live in the 80s. But the Bears have fired offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, which we talked about earlier this week, last week. I don't know. It all blends together. But after we talked to Cynthia Freeland from the NFL Network about how they
mishandled
just completely.
Justin Fields.
And it bewildered me how they just decided, Justin Fields doesn't get a run for the first half of the season. And guess what? The Bears were very bad in the first half of the season. They decided to let Justin Fields be Justin Fields, and all of a sudden they finished 7-9.
Isn't that funny how that works?
Luke Getsy definitely deserved to be fired for that blunder alone. Matt Eberflus probably saved his job with that stretch in the last half of the season, but it'll be interesting to see who they bring in there to try and get the most out of Justin Fields. I think this is
as long as Justin Fields is still the guy.
Assuming,
that is the $1 million question to be asked to this day.
And I think
I'm
it's
cool.
trending in the direction that he will be.
Right, and I'm cool with Justin Fields. I'm also cool with going to the draft. Like, I don't really have a true preference on what the Bears should do or need to do, because I think Justin Fields will be successful if he ends up or in Atlanta, and, he's back in his hometown, and, he's playing for his home state. Like, Justin Fields will have a successful career where he goes, and Atlanta is in true need of
Atlanta's really intriguing
of a quarterback, and the Bears could get some picks out of it. So there's a lot of good that can come from it. And there's also a lot of good quarterbacks in the draft if they don't want to take Caleb Williams at 1, if they want to trade out of that pick, because you still have Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix. There's some other good names in the draft that are worthy of taking and potentially could turn into your franchise quarterback. Now, I say all that to now go back to the point of Getsy. If Justin Fields is still in-house, I would love an offensive coordinator like Ken Dorsey, who was fired from Buffalo earlier this season. And Dorsey knows how to mix in the quarterback run with the pass very well. And he's done that with Josh Allen. Yeah. And we've seen him have a lot of success. I don't know why Ken Dorsey got fired. I still to this day think he's a really good offensive coordinator, and the Bears would make a lot of sense for him. The only other offensive coordinator that I'd want is Todd Monken. But Todd Monken is not going to leave Baltimore. He just got there.
Right.
And he just started working with Lamar. So if it's Justin Fields, give me Ken Dorsey. If it's not Justin Fields and they go with a fresh young quarterback, then I think, your options are wide open, because whoever you bring in will be attached to that quarterback. And then, if that quarterback doesn't have success, then it's also on the offensive coordinator, because that's something that I also believe kept Eberflus's job, is he didn't draft Justin Fields. That was a different coaching staff that had Fields, and then Eberflus just came into a situation. So that could also fall on then, is Eberflus a good head coach if they draft a new quarterback? Do they make it work with that young quarterback? Because if they don't, then they don't really know how to coach football, and you have to move on completely from everybody.
Another guy that you should think about as your offensive coordinator, if you are sticking with Justin Fields, is Greg Roman. I know
that's a good one.
He's the one that kind of designed that offense around Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. He resigned after last year because of some kind of inexplicable play calling, and he ended up kind of taking, listen, he obviously was the one calling the plays, but it really overshadowed how good he was in designing an offense around Lamar Jackson. That to me is a guy that, and I believe he was there when the 49ers were using Colin Kaepernick as well.
Is that with Harbaugh?
Yes. I believe he helped design the Kaepernick offense that we saw be super effective as well. So that's a guy to me that's really
that's a good one too.
And he's not working. He's currently not coaching.
Well, same thing with Dorsey. Both guys are free agents in a way.
And so those are ones that, like, if you really want to take advantage of Justin Fields' legs, Greg Roman has as good of a track record of anybody of getting running quarterbacks effective in the NFL. That's a guy that I would look at, still pretty young, just 51 years old, and has a pretty good track record there. So that's a guy that I would pay attention to for sure.
Yeah, Matthew on the stream says, don't trade Justin Fields for another Justin Fields. Like I'm with that line of work.
Yeah.
I'm on that same path, but I'm also on the path to, like, if I got Michael Penix, I'm cool with Michael Penix because I loved watching Michael Penix this season.
And I don't think there's a Justin Fields type. Maybe Jaden Daniels.
That's who Daniels. I would lean as more Justin Fields.
But for the most part, like, I know, like, Penix can be mobile. He's not a runner. Caleb Williams is very mobile, is a pass-first guy. Bo Nix, mobile, but a pass-first guy. Most of the guys in the draft this year are mobile, but clearly pass-first. I know Justin Fields was pass-first at Ohio State, but his legs are a much bigger part of what he does than any of those guys outside of Jaden Daniels.
Didn't Cam Ward decide that he's going to the NFL draft?
And I don't know where he's going to be. That's an interesting one.
What could be really interesting here is maybe, and to build off of Matt's second point, is starting with the lines and then select a a quarterback. Maybe it's a situation of, okay, in the early picks, you keep Fields, you build up your line. Yes, you maybe get another piece on the outside. You make that offense elite. And then in, say, the third round,
you take a flyer on
a flyer on, whoever.
Maybe
like Cam Ward.
Maybe Cam Ward.
If that's where
round.
he is. I don't we'll have to see after the combine where all these guys fall.
And outside of the first round, I don't have a good feel on who else is projected where at this point. But yeah, that's definitely an option as well. If you're not 100% sold on Justin Fields, but maybe you want to give him another chance with a different offensive coordinator, it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle this, because I don't know how far away they are if you get Justin Fields right. Like, I don't know that this is I don't know if they're a Super Bowl contender, but I don't know how far off they are from the playoffs if they get Justin Fields playing right. It'll be interesting to see how they handle this. Real quick here before we hop into our last segment, which is going to be with
a little NBA talk.
Yeah, with Dan Favale from Bleacher Report. There was some big NBA news over the last couple of days, so I wanted to touch base with Dan. Before we did that, though, there was some big news. We mentioned Tiger Woods in trivia a little bit there, and Tiger Woods and Nike are splitting ways. They have finally ended their 27-year partnership, and it feels like a really big deal. I mean, it feels like if Michael Jordan left Nike. It feels like if maybe LeBron is a better example, because LeBron and Nike have been embedded for almost as long as Tiger Woods and Nike, and the idea of Michael Jordan leaving Nike just doesn't even seem feasible. But it was the Tiger Woods Nike thing was
can't really make Nike Tiger Woods shoes though,
right?
I mean, I guess they could.
I mean, they did make golf shoes with the Tiger Woods logo and stuff, and their golf brand.
That's what makes Jordan so iconic.
And he's got his own like brand, basically, not just he's a Nike guy. But Tiger Woods was the closest thing Nike had to Michael Jordan,
and honestly, they
since
could
Michael
make a ton
Jordan.
of money off of golf shoes.
And they make Jordan golf shoes now.
Right?
Have you seen those where it's like the classic Jordan styles with golf? Like, I almost want to start golfing just so I can get a pair of.
I need a pair of Tigers.
I need a pair of Jordan 11s with the golf cleats on them. But it was one of the more iconic partnerships, and especially if you were in an impressionable age like I was, late 90s, early 2000s, those Tiger Woods Nike commercials were, I mean, just embedded in my memory. I've never been a huge golf guy, but there was a time where I was a huge Tiger Woods guy.
And I'm a huge Tiger Woods fan. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, was there a point in time after a lot of the baggage that he's been carrying with him over the course of these last 20 years where Nike and him had like a falling out and then they came back together?
Well, they pulled him from a lot of the public stuff.
Maybe that's what it was.
Is kind of what it was, but officially over after 27 years. Wrapping up the show here on a Wednesday on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. We are live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. You can catch us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube streams as well. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Dan Favale from the Bleacher Report. Dan, how are you this morning?
Hey, Dan,
can you there?
I'm doing well.
There he is. All right.
We are doing well. We'll start off with Draymond here, Dan, because our producer just played a cut of him talking about how he's confident he can cut out the antics. It's been like 15 years of this. How confident are you that Draymond can cut out the antics?
I don't think we can default to confidence. I think it's very much a situation of we'll just believe it when we see it. Can he go the rest of the season without having an on-court incident that ends up costing his team just valuable winning and competitive equity if he gets suspended or again or thrown out of a game or does something in a game that changes the tenor of it. It's as you said, it's been almost a decade and a half of this. I do hope everything is all right in his personal life, but you can't, he said things along these lines before. And so I think it's, like I said, it's just a very much we'll believe it when we see it situation.
Dan, as the Grizzlies were just starting to get some legs underneath them. They got them swiped away with the loss of Ja Morant. And it's not a team that finished second in the West without Ja Morant on this team. Instead of what could have been a get to the play-in game hope, Memphis has to sleep well still knowing they'll end up with a lottery pick, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly not going to catch the Spurs, the Wizards, that group, the Pistons, of course, but they were pretty bad without John Morant. They had the worst offense in the league before he came back. And so they're a team that, maybe they don't end up with as bad a record as the Charlotte Hornets or maybe even the Blazers, but they could have top 6, top 7 lottery odds. And, maybe they get lucky and they still do have some assets. And so I saw some people calling this a blessing in disguise. I would totally disagree with that, but you are going to have the ability to recalibrate and put a much better product on the floor at full strength next season. I think the real big question for them, though, is can you figure out what's going on with Marcus Smart? He got injured again in their game last night. He hasn't been great this year, and so do you look at moving him for other assets given what you got up to get him?
We're talking with Dan Favale of the Bleacher Report. You mentioned some of the bottom tier teams in the league, the Hornets, the Wizards are down there, obviously the Pistons, which the Pistons maybe seem like the most hopeless of the entire group. And you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's pretty obvious that the Spurs have the most hope, right? Just because of Wemby, or do you have more concerns about them than some of these other teams?
No, I don't have more concerns about the Spurs. I would like to see them, and they've gotten better at it in a little bit, in part because of injuries, just in part it does seem like they're going to rely on some of the Trey Jones, Wemby minutes a little bit more. But they need to get kind of another offensive organizer in there, because while I appreciate experimentation with Jeremy Sohan running point or just giving Wemby a lot of touches from the perimeter, it's clear that he's best optimized if you can get him going to the basket or maybe getting him the ball closer to the basket. And right now they don't have a ton of guys that can do that. And so that's going to be the challenge for them, not just looking ahead to future drafts and free agency, but maybe even at the trade deadline. You're not interested in winning games as much as other teams right now, clearly, while you're developing, but you do want to optimize and streamline the development of the single most important player in your building and of the next, 10, 15, 18, 20 years, hopefully. And so I'm very interested to see how they go about that.
Dan, Eric Spoelstra got paid last night, 8-year deal, $120+ million added to for a contract extension. And my question to you is this, because we know that the Heat have made it to the big game, but just haven't been able to kind of take that next step when they're there, at least recently. But Spo is, he's just an incredible coach in my eyes. And I guess my question to you is, we see so much turnover at that spot with NBA teams, I guess. And what's made Spo different over the years to be able to kind of control his own destiny, even when we see some coaches that win NBA titles get fired 2-3 years later?
I think the two things that stand out the most are has to be maybe the most adaptable coach in the NBA when you look at the iteration of teams that he's coached. Whereas I think this is cropping up a lot right now at Steve Kerr in Golden State, is that he was never necessarily a player development guy. And so that's why he struggled handling with the youngsters and communicating with some of the youngsters there. Spoelstra, we've seen him take teams post Big Three to heights that you already mentioned that really belie the talent on their roster, but he's also coached a bunch of stars. I do think it helps that he's had the pretty strong backing of the front office, even dating back to when, members of the Big Three didn't necessarily want him there during that era. And then finally, you hear from these players that there's never any quibbling over what their role is, that he always makes everyone understand where their place is in the pecking order. And I think that communication might even be bigger than any of the adjustments and the strategies that he employs on the court, which the latter of which they're so complex and effective that they can go over your head. And so that's a huge part. So I think he should probably be the highest paid coach by a sizable margin. And in net, he now is, but per year, I think he's now second behind Pop. But this is just definitely a harbinger of how valuable and critical he is to that organization.
We're talking with Dan Favale of Bleacher Report. You mentioned the Heat, and sometimes they overachieve their talent. A team with plenty of talent is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who I don't know if people are surprised by the leap they've taken this year, but they've certainly put the rest of the league on notice. How do you think Oklahoma City should handle this balance of continuing to develop, obviously, their very young core, but also maybe trading in some of their trade assets to try and become a contender right now? Because we've seen a lot of these young teams think, oh, we've got a really long championship window, and lately it almost never plays out that way. Do you think Oklahoma City has to start thinking about being a legitimate contender as soon as now?
I absolutely think that they do, because you can look at the core and say, well, I mean, look, we have J-Dub and we have Chet Holmgren, we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We have the ability to be good for a really long time. We've seen these windows before just open and close very quickly. And even in OKC, when you look at them making that finals run together in 2012, and then that's it with that core of Ibaka, Harden, Westbrook, and Kevin Durant. I think the balance is, when you look at this year specifically, making really big additions is just hard in the middle of the year. And so I think you look more so at fine-tuning the roster. Can you get more defensive rebounding? Can you get a higher volume shooter in the half court that maybe cracks the top 7 or 8 in your rotation and could appear in the postseason? And then you really have to look inward over the offseason when you're going to start dealing with the Josh Giddey extension. You have some of these other guys that you're not really using in Poku and Trey Mann, who are coming up on free agency. And that's when you look at making the bigger move based off what happens in the postseason. It's not about being brash or trying to accelerate. It's really about just understanding that title windows, no matter how long it appears like they're going to be open, they're like 2 to 3, maybe 4 years at this rate. I think you need to maximize your time at the top of the pecking order of the league, and the Thunder are closer to that than not right now. And so I think that question is going to be more of an off-season question, but it's one that they absolutely do need to ask and answer heading into this summer.
Dan, got a couple minutes left here with you. You mentioned the championship windows and how short they can be now. It really seemed like instead of maximizing their championship window with Steph Curry, Golden State went all in on trying to make a longer championship window with a young core of Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, and James Wiseman. Half of those guys are already gone. Kuminga is unhappy there in Golden State. Is there a way for them to pivot still at this point to maybe go become relevant in this championship conversation? Or, as I think, have they pretty much just botched the end of the Curry late prime and his championship window?
Yeah, I think it's more so the latter, where it feels like they've botched the end of the late championship window, and that even the more we look back on that 2022 title run, you don't want to say it was fluky or lucky, but it was kind of lightning in a bottle. And I look at the trade market. The Warriors have the assets. They have some of their young players. They have some picks. They have some salary matching tools. But there's just no guy that you look at and say, well, he elevates them to here. That's on the market, whether it's Pascal Siakam, whether it's DeJounte Murray, even trying to think about players who could maybe appear on the trade market that aren't being talked about, whether it's Lauri Markkanen in Utah or Mikal Bridges from Brooklyn. And that's assuming they could even have the best offer. Yeah. That it's not even just a matter of how they mishandled it. Well, now they're getting to a point where they have to figure out how to handle some of the vets, where if Klay Thompson isn't playing as well, or Andrew Wiggins is imploding, or even once Draymond Green comes back, what if he's made threes and played pretty well defensively this year when he's on the court, but what if he slips? And so now they're just juggling all these different balls in the air, and I don't know how they catch them. And it's not, I don't think it's a matter of one player or one move. It probably has to be a series of them. And at best, they might be able to, address, make some consolidation moves over the offseason. But again, based off the trade market right now, I'd be shocked if there's anyone they could acquire who changes their trajectory.
That's Dan Favale from Bleacher Report. Dan, we appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
Most definitely. Thank you guys for having me. Take care.
Thanks, Dan. That's Dan Favale from the Bleacher Report. That is all we have for you here on a Wednesday on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Andrew and I will be back tomorrow, and hopefully maybe we're talking about another Husker commitment out of the transfer portal. Who knows? Wouldn't hate it. We will see here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.